Hello everyone. Welcome to this week's installment of Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. And before we start, I just want to say thank you to all of our frontline and emergency workers at our hospitals and long-term care facilities, and all those who are working so very hard to keep us healthy and safe during these challenging times. Thank you. The installments of Ask a Historian from Heritage Mississauga, what we're asking you to do is send us your questions. Are there things that you're curious about, things around the city that you're interested in learning more about? We may not have all the answers, but we're certainly going to have some fun exploring the story and the history of Mississauga.
Hi, Matthew. I hope you're staying healthy and well. Thank you for initiating this Ask a Historian session. What a great way to stay connected with residents and learn more about our city's history during this challenging time. I look forward to learning more about our history through your insights. My question to you is related to the COVID-19 pandemic that we are facing. Mississauga has come to a standstill, and with good reason. Have there been any other historical events in our city that we've seen Mississauga jump into an emergency action plan like we are today? One that comes to mind is the Mississauga Miracle. Are there any other examples that you can share with viewers? Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you for your question, Madam Mayor, and thank you for your leadership and all of your efforts during these unprecedented times. Greatly appreciated, and thank you. Throughout our collective histories, we've faced challenges, both in terms of emergencies and health crises. Not a generation goes by that's not faced with certain challenges, whether they be conflict overseas, whether they be health emergencies and pandemics and epidemics that have raced through this geography, or emergencies throughout our time. When we look at emergencies, we think of Hurricane Hazel in 1954, the Molten Gas Explosion in 1969, or the Mississauga Miracle, the train derailment of 1979. When looking at these moments, these emergencies as moments in time, in general terms, the challenges were short-lived. The economic impacts were relatively controlled. Certainly it affected people, and I do not mean to diminish that in any sense. The impacts felt by residents at any time become milestones within their own lives, or something that they continue to reflect on and shape the course of their memories of the connections to this place. The evolution of this place connects to the stories, the milestones of a community, and challenges, whether they be health or emergencies, create some of those milestone moments and really do connect to the story of this place. And we can explore some of those in the future, but that does not get to the heart of your question. When reflecting on these moments and looking at times that echo the challenges that we're currently facing with COVID-19, really two moments come to the forefront, at least in this historian's brain. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 to 1920, and of course the Great Depression of the 1930s. And when we look back at those, we think, the dark moments of the wider history, not just Mississauga, but of course beyond. During the Great Depression, the economic and social impacts were long-lasting and pervasive. It shaped a generation of people. Many of us have parents or grandparents who lived during those times or grew up in the shadow of those times, and it continued to shape their perspective and their interaction with the world and the people around them. So the Great Depression has a large component of those economic and social impacts of greater challenges. Residents of historic Mississauga were certainly impacted. We have a scattering of stories and of imagery that kind of tell the tale from the 1930s, but we don't have a lot of those personal recollections. So a little bit of that kind of local community memory, the record, is somewhat lacking from the Depression years. But many recall the impact, again, of the challenges that a generation faced during the Depression. However, in terms of the Spanish flu, a pandemic that hit worldwide just over 100 years ago, again, there's no living memory from the Spanish flu, but it still continues to echo on down through history as one of those moments that challenged humankind. And not unlike some of the challenges we're facing now, there's certainly some parallels to be drawn. The impacts were significant of the Spanish flu and felt around the world. It's estimated that it infected over 500 million people, or about a third of the world's population, and somewhere between 3 and 5% of the world's population succumbed to this influenza, making it the deadliest known pandemic in history, or at least in recorded history. Approximately 55,000 people during the Spanish flu pandemic lost their lives in Canada, and historic Mississauga was not spared. We were certainly impacted as well, but we do not have exact numbers. The newspapers, like the Streetsville Review, carried the medical recommendations for things that, unfortunately, we have become accustomed to now. Things like social distancing, closure of public spaces and large gatherings, closure of schools, and recommendations to close public businesses. We're not the first to face this. 100 years ago, these were some of the same challenges that were faced by people living through the Spanish flu. The bigger difference between then and now, through examining documents and newspaper records of the time, some of the biggest differences is how the organized and coordinated governmental and health agency response and support systems that are in place now to respond to this that were not in place in 1918. And much of what we rely on today simply did not exist then. The social supports, the social security network that we greatly rely on, simply were not in existence. In 1918, much of the decision making related to the medical responses were at the local level, the local doctors, the local boards of health, and they were varied greatly from one area to the next, as did the treatments themselves. Some of the doctors were not. There was no vaccine, of course, for it initially, but also many of the doctors were uncertain on how to treat the Spanish flu as it came through, as a very highly contagious, and measures were found to be rather inadequate. Doctors, of course, did their best, but nonetheless, the information and knowledge of how to treat it was generally lacking. So while the local doctor could order closures of things like the school and churches and advise for measures like isolation, many other things like businesses and public spaces, closures were recommendations only, and so some of the challenges, although there are parallels, the system, the structure, if you will, are quite a bit different than they were 100 years ago. So in short, to the question itself, Mississauga has jumped into action before to face emergencies, but from a historical perspective, the scale of the response today is unprecedented. When factored against current unknowns, the duration, how long is these going to last? What's the full economic impact going to be, not only for the municipality, but also for the residents within the municipality? The long-term social and employment effects and things like that. We don't know the answer to this. In a way, we can look back at the Spanish flu and we see a time capsule, if you will. We know when it began and we know essentially when it ended and when the recovery was. Same with the Great Depression and that realm. We don't have that data, if you will, yet for COVID-19. It will be some time, maybe even years, before we can fully analyze the full measures and impacts of this moment in time. But certainly, the response itself is unprecedented in the historical sense. Epidemics and pandemics and emergencies have come before. Historically, the medical community in times of adversity has made leaps in understanding how to combat illnesses. We see that today. Medical treatments, vaccines, and inoculations were all born out of these times of mass health concerns. Much like today, collectively people coped, soldiered on, learned, listened to medical advice, and emerged from it as time passed. At these times, we're dealing with the challenges presented by COVID-19 and our emergency responses to it. We can draw parallels to the past, and perhaps we can collectively take a very small comfort in the knowledge that in time, this too shall pass, and we will emerge from it. Question from Cheryl on the Ward family in Clarkson, and asking about the farm run by Cyrus and Douglas Ward. Thank you for the question, Cheryl. And the Ward family lived along Clarkson Road for 3 generations, immediately adjacent to Spring Creek Cemetery, if you know where that is, on Clarkson Road North. As Spring Creek Cemetery has expanded over the years, the cemetery itself was founded in the 1820s. As it expanded, it actually acquired property from the Ward family and the adjacent Shook family as well to create the existing cemetery that we know today. But the Wards themselves, their association with this property and with Clarkson and Clarkson Road go back to 1872. George Ward, Cyrus Ward's father, George Ward purchased part of the William Kelly farm along Clarkson Road, what was then Lot 29, Concession 2, south of Dundas Street. George and his wife, Sarah Ann Lawrence. Lawrence is connected to the Lawrences of the nearby Sheridan. Sarah and George had 6 sons and 1 daughter. Sarah must have had her hands full, you would think. George Jr., William, John, Archie, Cyrus, Albert, and the youngest, Mary. Their father, George Ward Sr., died very suddenly in 1890 as a result of an accident when he was digging a well. We don't know if the accident was on that property or not, but according to the doctor's report, the well collapsed on him while he was in the hole digging the well. And so rather unfortunate and sudden end to George. George's widow, Sarah Ann, carried on with the farm, likely with the help of her older children. The children at the time of George's passing were between the ages of 19 and 9. The also listed on the property or in close proximity is a Robert Ward, and we're not entirely sure what his relationship is, although possibly a brother of George, and so it looks like there was some other help available to Sarah and the children. In 1907, the property was transferred from Sarah to Cyrus Richard Ward, who was one of the sons. Cyrus and his wife Anna Farr had 4 children, George, Ruby, Douglas, and Helen. Cyrus owned the property until 1949. By then it was reduced to 13 acres in size. The reduction was a result of selling off acreage to Spring Creek Cemetery over the years. And he granted his property in 1949 to his son Douglas Ward. And in 1951, these last 13 acres were sold to Spring Creek Cemetery. Douglas himself passed away in Northumberland in 1997, so not that long ago. Beyond the family records that we have, the typical things, the property records and census records that give us a timeline of the property, other than the fact that they're indicated their employment as fruit growers in Clarkson, we do not have a lot of additional information on the family at this time. If you are on Ancestry.ca, there is a family information and a family tree and several pictures posted of the Ward family, so that might lead to other avenues of investigation in regards to the family. But nonetheless, for 3 generations, the Ward family lived along Clarkson Road, immediately adjacent to Spring Creek Cemetery, and were fruit growers in the community. So hopefully that answers a little bit of your questions. Might have paved the way for some more questions and additional investigation, but happy sleuthing on that one, and hopefully I've brought back a little bit of community memory in terms of timeline and location and the like. Thank you. Our next question on Ask a Historian is around amalgamation, and so thank you, Derek, for the question. And yes, Mississauga was born through amalgamation. In 1968, Toronto Township incorporated to become the town of Mississauga. This brought the unincorporated villages together as part of this new town. These villages included Clarkson, Cooksville, Dixie, Arundel, Lorne Park, Malton, Meadowvale, and Sheridan. And these form the nucleus, if you will, the building blocks which would create the town of Mississauga in 1968. So from 1968 to 1974, the area that is now the city of Mississauga included 3 separate municipalities. In 1974, the towns of Mississauga, of Streetsville, and of Port Credit were amalgamated together to create the city of Mississauga. So yes, Mississauga born through amalgamation of things that were once separated that were joined together. If you go to the council chambers at the Mississauga Civic Center, you'll see the names of the founding villages ringing the roof line at inside of council chambers at the Civic Center. However, there is history here older than 1968. All the entities that combined to create the town and then the city of Mississauga all have their own histories, their own stories that predate the city of Mississauga. People have interacted with this landscape for thousands of years. Wherever you live in the city today, people have lived there or walked there before. Perhaps not in the same building, not in the same house, but people have interacted and been on this landscape for hundreds and thousands of years. Our first non-Indigenous settler came to this community in the spring of 1807. We have 37 veterans of the War of 1812 buried within the bounds of what is today the city of Mississauga. People lived here, knew these rivers, these roads, this landscape long before the city itself came to be. Our oldest surviving documented building dates to 1819. This is just a good example of the bigger question. And yes, we are a young municipality, but we have old roots that we celebrate and connect with on our landscape today. And even as you drive around the city of Mississauga today, you'll connect with those in perhaps a passive way, kind of the welcome signs to some of those historic nodes that make up the city of Mississauga today. You'll still see the welcome signs that welcome you to Cooksville and Arundel and Meadowville Village and Streetsville and Port Credit and Malton and Lakeview and the others. They really do connect to the aspect of a city of layers, a city born through amalgamation, but a city with a rich history. Thank you. Thank you, Ian, for your question on the Adamson family. And we have connected in the past, although it has been some time. And I remember when we have connected, we looked at the kind of the family tree and tried to make some sense of it, given that you and I are connected in the distant past through our family lines. We are distant cousins, although it was a little bit of a challenge to decipher exactly how distant we are. I did have a chance to pour through The Adamsons of the Credit River Valley by Tommy Adamson. They're the focus of the Adamson family genealogy. And of course, the Adamsons, one of the very prolific families here in the early story of what is now the city of Mississauga. We do share a common ancestor, of course. You and I descended from Dr. Joseph Adamson, the first resident doctor in Peel County, and we are both 6 generations down from that line, although each of us are descended from a different son of Dr. Joseph Adamson, you from Charles and myself from Alfred. But nonetheless, it's a small interconnected world, so that's a bad segue, I guess, but hello again, and hope your sleuthing has continued to bear some fruit for you into the Adamson line. But to your question, I truly wish that I could add more to your search. We can readily find Norman Patchett and Ida Minerva Adamson, his wife, living on the Middle Road, near where Indian Road and connects to the South Service Road today, Clarkson, Lorne Park area. So those two are readily found on the census records. But trying to piece together the family as it's come through the successive generations after them is a bit of a challenge, and I assume the reason for your question as well, trying to find more stories about them. It is a challenge beyond Tommy's book as to reaching down the family trees, if you will, and trying to decipher more about those for those who did not have a lot recorded about them or told of them. There are some branches of the Adamsons that have copious amounts written about them and pictures that have been gathered. At least from the records that I have, you're down a family line that I haven't gathered or haven't been able to find a great deal on. And so that continues really with this answer as well, is that I wish I had more to give you. Again, there are some branches that have more, but undoubtedly there is more out there to be found. And so I'm going to, hopefully this will offer an opportunity to try to, this forum will offer us an opportunity to try to gather more stories for you and for our community record as well. So I'd like to reach out to anyone watching the video and our members. If you have any stories, any information to share on Norma and Ida Minerva Patchett of Clarkson Lorne Park, developer of Charles Frederick Adamson and his wife Mary Jane Rundle. Please connect with us. Looking for pictures, stories, information. Let us know. Share your stories. Share your memories if you have them of these people and their times, and we can help fill in the gap for one resident and his family, but also perhaps fill in a little bit more of the remarkable story of the very large Adamson family. So sorry I can't be of more help immediately, but let's see if we can dig up some more information as a community going forward as well. So always happy to help, always happy to gather, and hopefully we can find something together. So cheers, cousin, and hope you're well. Thank you. Our next question on Ask a Historian is from Manny, and Manny has a two-parter for me this week, so thanks Manny for the questions. And the first one relates to a specific building, namely 55 Lakeshore Road East. And Manny, in our investigations into buildings, very rarely is there a date stone or an exact date of construction. We go through a myriad of records to try to ascertain a potential date of construction, and that's the case here. There's always a challenge to actually putting a specific date on it, but we might have been able to do that in this case. It doesn't always happen, so I'll kind of walk you through the process a bit as well. In regards to 55 Lakeshore Road East, we have a 1949 photograph of the community showing the old post office building and the adjacent buildings along Lakeshore Road and the Credit River Harbour and the like. And in that building, in that photograph, the 1949 photograph, if you zoom in on it, you'll find that the location where 55 Lakeshore Road East is empty at that point. So we're fairly certain in 1949 the building was not there. In 1954, which is the first aerial we can pan out around Lakeshore and look at the streetscapes from a bird's eye view, the building is there in the same envelope, relatively the same envelope that it appears in today. So we're pretty strong in saying that between 1949 and the building was built between 1949 and 1954. That being said, having a chance to look back at the property records narrows down our focus a little bit better. The building is part of Lot 15 on the south side of what was then known as Toronto Street in Plan 300 for Port Credit. And at Lot 15, we see a large transaction taking place for a commercial building on April 18th of 1950. April 18th of 1950, and Fred Hackham granting a property to Fred Hassan, Hassan, for $17,000, which is a significant chunk of change in 1950. This does indicate that there is improvements on that property, and improvements in this point is likely the building of a substantial building. And so we can say with certainty the building was built sometime between 1949 and 1954, and I would suspect, or a strong suspicion, that this transaction in 1950, April of 1950, relates to the building at 55 Lakeshore Road East. So that's possibly the date of construction is in 1950. The property abstract shows that the property right from its beginning stages was used as a restaurant, and it was given the name as Fred's Fish and Chips. Now, given that the one who sells the property in 1950 is Fred Hackham and the purchaser is Fred Hassan, assuming one of the Freds is involved in Fred's Fish and Chips. There have been other establishments here over time, including the Brentwood Restaurant, Geneva Patisserie, the Talal Restaurant and Tavern, Pete the Greeks, and the Harp, of course, now Door 55. That being said, I can find no reference to a bowling alley. You had asked about a bowling alley on the second floor. I haven't found any reference to that or any remembrance. It doesn't mean that it wasn't there, and it's not possible that it had occurred over time, but perhaps we're going to have to turn to the community on this one and see if there's any remembrance of or knowledge of. So turning to those who are members and those watching the video tonight, encourage you to contact us, share your memories, your photographs of 55 Lakeshore Road East, now Door 55, formerly the Harp, and of course other Brentwood and Pete the Greeks and others. Photographs, memories, stories. Does anyone remember a bowling alley? Those we'd be interested to hear from you. So thank you, and let's have some fun exploring local history together. Our second question from Manny relates to a photograph, and I guess, Manny, I need some clarity on the photograph because you mentioned that there are two children looking at standing on the bank of Port Credit Harbour in the early 1900s. Well, two photographs actually come to mind. The first one has two children looking westward along Lakeshore Road, where the bridge is, overlooking the harbour, and in the background is the stonehooker Lillian tied to the bridge pier. That's one of the pictures. That one was taken in 1908. A second picture, likely taken in 1912, shows two children looking northwards in the harbour towards Lakeshore Road Bridge, with the stonehooker, the Madeline, settled low in the water in the harbour. So those are their two pictures, both with children in the foreground with their backs to the camera, both looking at boats in the harbour. The first one in 1908, the second one likely around 1912 or so. The boats are different, of course, one being the Lillian and the other one being the Madeline. And that's a whole, we can talk about stonehookers another time, remarkable stories and legacies there. You were asking about the names of the children, and that's a little bit more of a challenge, given that we have the two photographs and we can't say with any certainty that the children are the same in the photographs. That might be a moot point because we don't actually have the names of the children that we've been able to find. I've put it out there to our network of contacts, and some are going to see if they can find or if they've come across, but I haven't had a positive response as of yet, and it's not something we've had in our collection. Both pictures were part of the Harold Hare collection, which was a local historian and photographer in Port Credit, and Hare family long recorded in the annals of local history, and Port Credit descendants still live within the community today. We're told by the late Lauren Joyce, a local historian and marine aficionado, that the children in the 1908 photograph overlooking the Lillian were Nation Block boys. Nation Block or Nation Block were local Port Credit families, but I can't verify that, and I don't have first names. So at the moment we do not know their names, but they are remarkable pictures of the community in its early phases of its history over time, overlooking the harbour, remembering when it was commercial endeavours like the stonehookers that drove the economy of Port Credit. And again, perhaps we can wander down memory lane and talk about stonehookers at another time, but thank you for the question. Our next question from Michael is about the origin of Gordon Woods, the name origin, and I guess a quick response is Gordon Woods is named after Gordon Drive, but that doesn't really answer your question. Gordon Drive, along with the parallel Parker Drive, were laid out in 1920 to 1922 as an early subdivision of a private land estate. Gordon Drive, and therefore Gordon Woods, is named after Lieutenant Andrew Robertson Gordon, who lived between 1851 and 1893. And the Gordon and Parker families owned the property, what is now Gordon Woods, as well as surrounding properties as well. A very wealthy and influential early family. The Parkers associated with the grape growing industry and the winery in Cooksville. Nearby, if you pan out a little bit from Gordon Woods, you're going to find Harbour Road as well as leading into the community, but also to the other side of Hurontario Street. Harbour Road takes its name from the large estate house, Harbour House, which was built in 1851. It was actually located on the east side of Hurontario Street, right adjacent to where Cheryl and Harbour Road are today. The house was built in 1851 by Henrietta Jennings, and it's her daughter Lucy that married Albert Parker of the Parker family. Albert had other brothers, Sir Henry and Sir Melville Parker, and Melville mentioned already, a local politician, but also involved in the early wine industry in Cooksville. The estate was called Harbour originally after Parker's ancestral lands in England. In 1872, Lieutenant Andrew Robertson Gordon of the Royal Navy, the British Royal Navy, married May Elizabeth Parker, the only child of Sir Melville Parker. Through that comes to Canada, settles in Cooksville, purchases or is granted Harbour House, which he then promptly renames Craigmeal after his own ancestral home in Scotland near Aberdeen. The property remained in the Parker Gordon family until 1914, when Lieutenant Andrew Robertson Gordon's widow, May, sells the property. So 1914, the Gordons are away from this property. The house itself, a Harbour House, Craig Meal, depending on the time that you reference it, stood until 1968 when it was demolished to make way for modern apartment buildings, unfortunately. The laneway to the home actually follows part of what is now Cheryl Road, just near Harbour Road itself. The Gordon name is remembered, of course, here in the name of Gordon Drive, but also Gordon Woods, also Harbour Trail, and Parker Drive as well, all connect to this time of family. During the 1880s, Andrew Robertson Gordon, himself, he was commanded the first 3 Canadian expeditions to Hudson's Bay for mapping. Following the Hudson's Bay expeditions, he was appointed the nautical advisor to the Department of Marine and Fisheries and the commander of the protection of the fleet. Now, how's that for a title? He died in Ottawa, 1893, and is buried at St. Peter's Anglican Cemetery in Arundel, corner of Mississauga Road and Dundas Street. So quite a remarkable individual, wealthy and well-remembered family and name within the Gordon Woods area. You can learn more about the life and times of Andrew Robertson Gordon at the Dictionary of Canadian Biography online. And there's a picture of him therein as well. So Lieutenant Andrew Robertson Gordon, also later in his career, nautical advisor to the Department of Marine and Fisheries and commander of the Protection Fleet for Canada. Remarkable career, although short-lived, passing away early in 1893. Again, buried here in Mississauga at St. Peter's Anglican Cemetery at Arundel. So hopefully you enjoy your exploration of local history, and again, visit Dictionary of Canadian Biography online to learn more about Lieutenant Gordon. Thank you.